about empathy today. It's a big buzzword, right? We want our kids to have empathy, compassion, and yeah, it's important. But sometimes I just want to alert you to the fact that some of our most empathic kids can look like anything but. It's easier to see empathy when a child sees another child fall and they're like, oh, are you okay? Right? But the child who sees another child fall and is like, hey, get up, stupid, right? We're like, oh, you have no empathy. And I just want to take a moment and explore this with you because sometimes what you see as lack of empathy is actually a child who has so much empathy that they are shutting down and attacking because they can't handle it. And instead of looking at them as someone who doesn't have empathy, we can begin to understand that they don't have the coping skills for the empathy that they do have. Now, why does that matter? Well, because in life, we need to make sure we're solving the right problem. If I've got a light bulb and I keep changing the bulb, but it's actually the wire that's broken, I'm still not going to have light. So we need to always identify the correct problem. And when we take these highly empathic, highly sensitive kids who are acting sometimes like assholes, and we treat them like they're really unkind people because of how they're acting, then we begin to build that identity and the child believes us. I am someone who doesn't have empathy. I don't care about others. And then we keep saying, you need to care about others. And they start saying, well, I don't. That's not who I am. And they believe that. And we can take a child who's highly sensitive, highly empathic, and has really poor coping skills for that empathy and turn them into someone who's actually less empathic because we didn't understand the problem. So I want to share a little story with you all. My son, when he was about 10 years old, who is totally one of these kids, who is a very high empath, he can feel everything, but he doesn't have like always the words or the like interpersonal ability always to understand how to handle all of his feelings, right? That is something that for him took longer. For all of us, we have things that take longer and things that come very naturally to us. And so that's a skill that he has grown massively throughout his life. But in the early years, I misunderstood. And there was one day that really brought it home for me, where many, many, many years ago, there was a cover of Time magazine featuring a story about a young girl in Yemen. And this was during a famine in Yemen, and she was the cover. And it was talking all about how all of these children were dying and all of these humans were dying. And my son saw the cover and asked me what it was. And he was about 10 years old. And so I took a chance and I said, oh, this is a very sad story about something going on in the world. He said, what is it? And because he showed further interest, I said, well, it's an area of the world where this is what's happening. And I began to explain to him. And it so happened we were in the middle of sitting down to eat lunch. And I had made a sandwich for him. And as I handed him the sandwich, he pushed it away and he said, I don't want to eat. And I said, why? And he said, because it's awful. It looks stupid. And I, not having a moment of emotional intelligence in that moment, was like, how can you say this after what I just shared with you about these people? Like, you're sitting here having a sandwich passed to you, and like, you're ungrateful and refusing to eat. And I was bringing judgment to the moment. And he stormed off, and, I was upset. He was upset. And I sat there for a moment and my heart opened up and I was able to process my own feelings and say to myself, Abigail, you know your son is a good person. If he had to be right about this somehow, what would that look like? And I sat in that for a moment and I couldn't find the answer. And I came to him and I just gently tried to reconnect. And silently at first, and I put a hand on his back, and then I sat there, and he was still being mean for a while. And then he started to open up, and he asked me this question. It was so poignant. He said, who took the photo? And I said, what? And he said, who took the photo? And I said, a journalist. And he said, did they give them their food? And I said, what? And he said, did they give them their food? Did they save her? And I said, I don't know. They're telling the story, and that's what this journalist is doing to help. And he said, how could anybody stand there and not help her? How could anybody stand there and not give her their food? Did she make it? And I said, I don't know. And then I said, oh, is that why you didn't want to eat? And he said, duh. And my heart broke because here I was thinking that he didn't understand the situation, that he was being ungrateful and spoiled. And yet, that wasn't at all what was happening. He just didn't have words. And who could have words for such an atrocity? How can I expect him to understand that? I can't even understand it, right? I'm the one whose heart is more closed. He's the one whose heart was more open. And he couldn't take that openness, so he shut it down. I will never forget that day. I will never forget that moment. It taught me so much humility, to remember always not to judge. And I have seen this over and over and over again with the families that I work with, that some of our most empathic children look like our least. It's not true. It's simply not true unless we make it so. Just tuck that in your heart.